We've got Tony from Solihull and we've got Count Paul Sweet from Wolverhampton, along with Satish Mistry, who will give an update on the governance review when we get to that item on the agenda. At the moment, we are not quite chorus. Hopefully, but fingers crossed, we've done really well up to now in choruses, so fingers crossed we make it. Okay, so just want to welcome a new member to the committee, Councillor Kate Booth from Birmingham. Welcome, Kate. Kate replaces Councillor Hussain, who I think has got a place in Cabinet. All right, yeah. So thank you and welcome to your first meeting. So if we kick off then with the agenda, as normal, this meeting will be recorded and will then be uploaded onto YouTube for public viewing. So first of all, if we can take apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillors Ali and Pada.
Thank you. And I believe Councillor Akhtar has notified us that he's running late. And I think Councillor Trickett is somewhere in the building, but he's probably held up on a previous call.
Are we still having substitutions or not?
Yes, substitute. If there is a nominated substitute who can attend, that would be far more appropriate. Yes, though yeah. I'm not aware whether we have any substitutes for Councillor.
Chair, if I'm co-opted, can I also ask to be nominated as a substitute then for Birmingham? If I'm coming anyway.
Sorry, folks. Sorry, Minister Chair.
It's all running really smoothly. Dan, can you enlighten us?
Yeah, I think given that you're a co-opting member of the committee anyway, you can't then co-opt. Excuse me, you can't then substitute for somebody in the sense you're a member of the committee anyway, rather than being a member of the committee's substitute. If that's clear.
Okay, I mean, I just, as you know, Dan, you know my frustration about the chorus rules and the sort of new and the legislative framework. But anyway, no, just a thought.
Yeah, no, I take the point, but as a rule, a member of the committee can't also substitute for someone else on that committee, as you'll potentially have the situation of somebody having multiple votes. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Hopefully, if the latecomers do arrive, we'll be quorate then, Liz. Okay, carrying on then with the agenda. So any declarations of interest, that's down on paper. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Chair's remarks, I'm really glad to see so many people here today. We've got quite a packed agenda. So we will have to be reasonably tight on time, but we do have a couple of items of pre-decision scrutiny, which for me are always the most important ones, because those are the ones that we add value to. So those are the items that I do intend giving slightly longer to in terms of discussion. Okay, so we'll move swiftly on. We've got two sets of minutes.
You want to move on, Chair? Move on. Move them.
I was going to let you finish, Chair, but I'm happy to second them if that helps.
I'm sure that is not constitutional to actually not even take the item before you've moved it.
I thought you had, Chair, so
I didn't. Me jumping in.
Apologies. I used to have another bad exemplar to follow, but now I've got mine.
Okay, so yeah, we've got two sets of minutes, minutes up from the 6th of September and then the minutes from the mayoral Q&A. So what I'll do is I'll take them for matters of accuracy first and then for matters arising. So minutes of the 6th of September, I'm taking this, everybody's read through those. So do we agree that they are a true record?
Happy to move they're a true record if this is the appropriate time, Chair.
No, I'll second it then.
Okay, and then can I take them for matters arising? So matters arising on page 1, page 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6. No matters arising. Okay, super. Are we quorate now? No. Okay. Okay, then I'll take the minutes of the 14th of October, which were the minutes of the mayoral Q&A, which will probably be much fresher in people's minds. So again, I'll take them for accuracy. Do we agree that they're a true and accurate record? And any matters arising. So page 7, page 8, page 9. The most important bit is page 10, with the observations to be shared with the Mayor for consideration and response for the next meeting. Any matters arising from those? No?
Chair.
Yes, Liz?
It's not so much a comment, direct comment there, but I just wanted to say I was unable to take part, and I did watch the YouTube video after the event, and I just wanted to congratulate Councillor Waters for her contribution on buses, because I thought it was the most authentic contribution of the whole session, and I think well, it really spoke to me, so I was cheering you.
Thank you.
I think that we have to pursue the debate about buses, because really the passenger experience really diverges from what we're talking about in the policy documents. So I thought that was great.
Thank you. Thanks, Vera, for your contribution.
You're welcome.
To last meeting. Okay, so we can't actually formally agree past those minutes, can we? Because we're not quorate, so they'll have to go forward to the board on the 19th. So if we move on now, I've had to rejig the agenda slightly because Satish, on his governance review, has asked if we could bring it forward because he'd got another meeting to go to. So I've moved Satish's update on the governance review to item 6. I believe Satish has shared a presentation around for that.
Yeah, we've got slides for the screen.
Right,
So
okay.
if Satish is ready, I will load those.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, just before we start, obviously we've invited Councillor Bob Slay along today as portfolio holder. Do you want to come and join the table, Bob?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It might just be, I know we've got the presentation, but it might just be worth, if Bob's okay with doing it, just giving us a brief update from your perspective as portfolio holder before we move into the presentation, which I'm guessing will be a bit more technical. If we can just have that overview, please.
Yeah, so that's helpful, Chair. I welcome the opportunity to come to Scrutiny to discuss where we got to with the governance review, the recommendations of which went to the leaders and the Mayor on Friday. But I did advise them that we'd be coming here today, obviously, to take comments on the Scrutiny Committee. Just to recap, in essence, Mayor and Leaders liaison meeting on the 11th of June determined that they would like a governance review with regard to certain elements of the combined authority and its operations. And subsequently, they set terms of reference for that particular review at that time. Those were to review the formal decision-making and consultation bodies of the CA, and secondly, to refresh the reported drafting, preparation, effective engagement of all key stakeholders and CA processes. And I'm sure Satish will be able to give us some further information on that. What we then did was we convened the working group listed on Satish's slides to examine and to gain evidence on a number of issues which were conducted through leaders and chief executives interviews with each constituent authority, interviews with the Mayor, interviews with members of the CA strategic leadership team, and so on. And equally, we came to overview and scrutiny to understand your perspective. We also considered how governance arrangements operated within other combined authorities, those that exist and the 10 currently within the country. And we looked at other issues with regard to Black Country, LEP, Coventry and Warwickshire LEP. And we also conducted an exercise with non-constituent authorities to understand what their views were with regard to the governance arrangements in the combined authority. What needs to be borne in mind is, of course, the authority consists of two organisations, the West Midlands Combined Authority and what is now Transport for West Midlands, which we inherited from Centro as the ITA, so that came into the combined authority body. There were findings and conclusions from that work. Clarity on purpose, I won't go through them all. How the portfolio model actually worked and whether it needed to be reviewed. Portfolio engagement, transport governance, the economy governance, and other similar matters. We went back to the leaders in essence, and they agreed that that work should continue. We also, which was very important, we also mapped all of the consultative and decision-making bodies within the combined authority to understand the complexity of the arrangements we had in place. Clearly, the only decision-making bodies in the combined authority are the board, who have overall responsibility, and the investment board, which has responsibility for the investment programme and for other funds that we have, including the Brownfield Land Property Development Fund, the Housing Investment Fund, Revolving Investment Fund, where those decisions are made, because they are based on the business cases presented to the investment board, which I actually chair. Out of the recommendations came a number of key issues. One, the leaders wanted the whole issue of economic governance considered. There were a number of different consultative bodies which had grown within that particular area of our work, and it was felt that that needed to be streamlined going forward. And therefore, we were tasked as a working group, and Satish led on this, to actually look at the economic governance within the combined authority, and that piece of work you are giving the results to today. So where we are, and I will let Satish come in, I know he wants to actually say a few words. There are 6 recommendations that have now come out of the review, which Satish will tell you about in a few moments, plus a number of observations which have come out equally. One which I think has been on the minds of the overview and scrutiny for some time, and that is the issue of members' allowances. We agreed at the meeting on Friday with the leaders that elements of those works, i.e. the recommendations, would be supported, and we would therefore enter into some discussion about how that was to be progressed, including a timeline to bring back those elements of the work of the working group back to both the mayor and leaders, and equally, I would assume, to this particular scrutiny committee. I'll stop there and I'll let Satish come in with his few slides. Satish, you can do so.
Thanks. Over to you, Satish.
Okay, Chair, I think the Deputy Mayor's actually very ably gone through most of what I wanted to cover in the slides, right? So I'm just wondering whether if we could move very swiftly through the slides, yeah, and then concentrate on the recommendations. So as Bob says, that was the working group that was set up at the behest of the Mayor and Leaders Liaison meeting in June. And the terms of reference were really around to look at the formal decision making and consultative bodies at the CA, and also to refresh the process for report drafting, preparation and effective engagement of all key stakeholders. So that was the terms of reference. Moving on, as Bob says, the process has been quite sort of detailed in many ways. We've only met as a group, I think it's about 5 times, but quite a lot of work has been done outside of the group and been considered by the working group, and both myself and Jodie, who sort of did some work on this as well, have gone through the details of it. We've done some very good comparative work and so forth, and all of this will be contained in a sort of document that we're producing at the moment. So moving on. So in terms of progress today, I think the group feels that it's very much sort of met its terms of reference in terms of what it was asked to do. But there were some other matters that came to our attention, and we've got some recommendations in relation to it. But just to update, on the first area around sort of looking at the formal decision-making entities at the CA, we've now carried a full governance map of the CA, which has been done for the first time, and that sets out all the various bodies. As Bob says, the main formal decision-making bodies are limited, but there's a whole raft of other sort of advisory and consultative bodies of one form or the other. So for the first time, we've got that now. Secondly, we have through Julie Nugent, one of the service strategic directors, gone through a set of proposal which you've had in on your papers at the moment around sort of setting up a new economic growth board. And this was one of the areas that was very much common as far as all the leaders was concerned, that this whole area did need rationalisation. So next slide. On the second area around refreshing report drafting and so forth, hopefully you'll all agree at scrutiny, having seen the reports for board, but certainly the reports are a much better sort of fit for purpose, member friendly in many ways, and ones that the public can utilise a lot more than they were at one time. We've limited them 4 pages with appendices, or 6 pages if they're all comprehensive in one document. That's gone down quite well. Secondly, we've improved the process for portfolio engagement in the report drafting process, so they are involved at a much early stage and do take the lead in terms of presenting items for both the mayor's meeting as well as the board itself. And the forward plan has been developed with a lot more information in relation to decisions which are about to come forward. So that's also helps quite a lot in relation to transparency around decision making. So I think moving on, I think we very much feel that the reason that the working group was set up were the 2 reasons. That's actually been met in many ways. But there were sort of series of recommendations which flowed from the working group's work, which came to our attention or flowed from the work that we did. And if I just quickly go through them, the first thing is we'd want to propose, which has now been agreed by the mayors and leaders, to have a sort of extensive rationalisation of decision making and advisory bodies within the service areas. So just in the same way that we've done it with economic governance, we'd quite like to take the other areas, probably transport next, led by the directors of portfolio leads, and try and sort of rationalise that whole area. So I think that would be good to do over a period of time. The second recommendation is continue the process of report drafting, and particularly around quality assurance and improving that the quality of the reports are at a much better standard. I'd quite like, once we've agreed the corporate strategy, to have the decisions aligned with corporate priorities, so everybody knows where the decisions relate to in terms of our corporate strategy. Recommendation 3, there was a feeling among the leaders that the engagement of a professional support officer would be helpful to finesse some of the decision making, particularly when it gets sort of difficult between the mayor and the individual authorities. So I think we're just giving some thought to how to sort of engage that. I wouldn't want to sort of replicate the support arrangements in the Met authorities. That needs to stay there with the chief exec and their people sort of supporting the leaders, but just some process to just finesse that decision making between us and the leaders. Recommendation 4, further engagement of constituent authorities to be undertaken by SLT. And some work has already been done on this, and I'm quite keen for the service directors, which have all agreed to do now, en masse to go out to the Met authorities and talk about a whole range of issues in one meeting, which applies to them around sort of regeneration, jobs and skills, the whole raft of issues, in a sense, transport as well. So we're going to sort of programme that in the new year, and hopefully that will sort of be well received. Recommendation 5, further opportunities for developing a space around policy issues, some of these difficult issues around finance, levelling up, future devolution. I just think it needs some space for the leaders and the mayor to be sort of doing that together. Finally, recommendation 6, further review to be undertaken in relation to engagement or inclusion of non-constituent authorities. I think so, some work to be done on that. The working group had 2 additional recommendations, which firstly, just for SLT to assess internal governance within their own directorates and just move towards more one organisation in terms of decision making. So we're doing some work at SLT around that over the next sort of 6 to 9 months. It's quite a big piece of work in terms of the constitutional documents, but we're hoping to embark on that. And the second area, this thorny issue of sort of member allowances, particularly around the sort of TDC allowances, and I think it's time that we engage the independent remuneration panel and ask them to look at the whole issue of allowances at the CA. Obviously, in terms of the scope of that review, it is limited because only the deputy mayor and the mayor's allowance can be looked at formally, together with sort of observations in terms of disbursements and expenses and so forth for other members. But I think it would be quite good for them to take a view around the TDC allowances, together with allowances for other members at the CA. And it may be that we can feed in some recommendations in relation to this to the constituent authorities for when they review their allowances. So these are the recommendations. They were agreed last Friday, and we'll be putting together a sort of action plan to implement these.
Thank you very much for that presentation and the number of recommendations that you've got there. And glad that you've the views of scrutiny have been incorporated into that. So I'll throw it open to the committee then. Has anybody got any questions, observations or points they would like to make? Simon?
Thank you, Chair. With regard to recommendations 3 and 5, with 3, I think from our work as a working group, the idea of a better communication between the mayor and leaders was central to a lot of the feedback we'd had. So I'm really pleased to see that that's emerged. My own concern would be that there's this fashion, which unfortunately came over from America, for chiefs of staff. And my concern here is this a chief of staff, or does the word professional mean an officer whose job is to kind of broker meetings between the mayor and the leaders? So that'd be my first question. If you don't mind, Chair, perhaps we could answer that, and I'll come back on recommendation 5, if that's okay.
Satish?
Yes, Bob may well have some words to add on this, but I think my sense of this is that it would be obviously a non-political person who would finesse the decision making around difficult areas, in a sense, right? So it's really not a chief of staff sort of person, right? But at the same time, it's not a sort of very junior person, right? So I think it needs somebody who can sort of bridge the gap between the leader, the respective leader, and the mayor as well.
Well, just to add, it's not a chief of staff role. The mayor does have a chief of staff actually within the mayoral group, but and of course the mayor is able under the terms of reference and the devolution bill to actually appoint a political advisor within the combined authority. But all of that very much is in the mayor's office. This is different, as Sash has quite rightly said. This is a support officer to actually allow the leaders, particularly, to have some insight into some of the policy development, very much similar to what many of you will have seen in your own local authority, basically. So I hope that answers the question. It's not a chief of staff in the sense of a political appointment.
Can I just bring Lisa in on that same point, and then I'll come to you for item number 5.
Thank you.
Really taking forward what Simon said, I think across the board, whether it's business, whether it's policymakers, one of the concerns about this region is the need for us to speak with one voice and for us to be far better at being absolutely clear on what our priorities are and having those difficult conversations, because there are going to have to be some difficult conversations. And in many ways, that's leadership. Leadership is about, and politics is all about brokerage, and it's about debate, and it's about trying to find that mutual way forward for the good of the place that we all represent. So I'm really slightly confused as to what a professional support officer would be doing that isn't actually partly. The mayor's role is partly to facilitate and broker a shared vision amongst the leaders. And then if it's actually a concern about how decisions get through or communication gets through, then we have a highly paid chief executive who partly also has that in their remit. And I suppose what I'm just slightly concerned at, we seem to be suggesting that one professional support officer can actually bridge what is actually a need for a real difference, change in culture and engagement and the way that we behave across the leadership in the region.
Bob, Satish, do you want to come back on that before we move on to Simon?
Yeah, I think just to confirm, the mayor, of course, has his own arrangements in place to actually have those conversations with the leaders across the system, whether it's local enterprise partnerships, non-constituent authorities, or whether it's the Met leaders themselves, and those political links do exist within the mayor's department. The issue about priorities, I think, is a very important point, because in essence, our priorities going forward will actually support the budget, if nothing else. And I think that the board itself will be taking a paper, I think in the 19th, although don't quote me on that, with regard to our corporate strategy and what those priorities are going forward for the combined authority. So I think Councillor Trickett's point is well made, but I think that work is very much in hand. I'd just like to pick up on the point of one voice. The reason that the combined authority exists is to have one voice, and that's what was the guiding principle when it was established all those years ago. And that principle still basically stands. That's why the geography is what it is, and the stakeholders and partners are what they are. I think to satisfy the committee, I can't recall us ever having a vote, because we tend to work on a consensus model, and it has survived those 6 years. So I think that evidence would suggest that actually the combined authority has come through that period. And even today, we very much have a consensus view around the table. I'm not saying we won't ever have a vote, but what I'm saying is I can't recall an occasion where we've actually gone to a vote, in my experience, either when I was chair or when the mayor came.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to recommendation 5, I was particularly pleased to see this, because when we did the scrutiny group, one of the issues was about communication, and as Councillor Trickett has already alluded to, but also there are so many things about the mayor's role, or the potential for the mayor's role in terms of leading the CA, that don't fit neatly into one portfolio. So I thought that this is actually really important in bringing together the leaders and the mayor over things like what next for devolution, what powers could we really usefully use, or what's, without being funny, what Bristol or Manchester just managed to squeeze out of the government, and therefore what can we ask for in parallel. So I thought 5 went with 3, but very important. It was actually more important in a way than 3. I mean, it's nice that they might have someone who'll help them, but actually 5 is crucial to both the leaders' reputation for delivering within their areas and the mayor's as delivering for the whole. So I thought this was really key and very, very welcome, and reflected the working group's issues as well as the ones that have come out in this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is anybody else? Bob, did you want to come back?
I think that's a really important point. And again, without going into too much detail, there is tremendous consensus with regard to submissions we make to government. The devolution white paper, there's a consensus view across the piece, across the system, that what we asked for within that devolution white paper is a view that is shared by all of the stakeholders and all of the constituents and non-constituents. And equally, the CSR submission, which has recently been submitted, and which of course we've all heard the budget, was a consensus position with regard to the combined authority, taking into account particularly elements that each local authority, we've got the city of Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Coventry, very important players. We need to know what their priorities are, because the mayor has very limited powers actually, but his key power is to be able to convene and get the right people around the right tables at the right time to actually deal with these issues before we make our pitch to government. And that's very much the way in which the combined authority does operate. We do tend to work on that consensus basis.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any more comments that anybody would like to make, Peter?
Anyone comment, Chair? I'll get this thing to work. It is working. Yes, thank you, Sam, for the recommendations. So I do recall that we saw this obviously some time ago, but the only thing is that I know it says a verbal report, but I think it would have been really, really helpful if we'd have had these in advance, because we would have probably contributed more to today to the recommendations. I mean, suddenly seeing my eyesight, even with glasses, is it is a little bit distance away, and I really, really could have done with something in advance. And as I say, to repeat myself, we'd have probably made more of a contribution, because we would have had some notes to and challenge, as it were, and support or agree or differ. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to make the general point that I think it's always very helpful for the committee to have sight of any presentation as far in advance as is possible. And I think this went to the leaders, leaders on Friday. So even if we'd had it at the start of the weekend to come across, that might have been helpful for us. So yeah, I would absolutely support your point, but we will circulate them afterwards. I've got three more people indicating. So I've got Liz, Ian and Mike.
Thanks very much, Chair. I thought what Satish presented verbally was very clear, but I really couldn't see the slides. Then they're terribly detailed, so I will welcome looking at them afterwards. But what I heard about the review of allowances, I really welcome. And I just wondered what the timescale would be for involving the independent remuneration panel. What's the plan there?
Satish?
Yes, I'm proposing to bring a report to the board in January, just commissioning the independent remuneration panel. You've got a sort of precedent for this previously, I think in 2016 when you did it, so we'll sort of just refresh the arrangements for that and ask them to look at the areas that we're asking them to look at. So obviously as part of their process, they need to gather evidence and undertake some interviews and so forth. So we'll try and do this as quickly as possible, but I think it will probably take about sort of 8 to 12 weeks, probably realistically. So certainly sort of in time for sort of Easter time, I think.
Okay, thank you. And Ian?
If I may to follow on from that, for some years now I've been questioning the validity of a free voluntary political system where frankly the public have very little idea as to how busy a councillor can be. And when you're involved at a quite senior level or cabinet, it's no longer part-time, it's virtually full-time. And the fact that we have so much difficulty getting quorate so often is bringing it home to us. I think at my present count is that the CA has something like 35 committees. In some respects, is our remit too big? Is it practical that free voluntary political involvement can actually sustain so much attendance? Let's be practical, let's be honest. One or two people are starting to agree with what I'm saying. And the concept of running 35 committees, often in a central area, over a huge geographical area, it's just straining credibility. So, I think allowances need to be looked at seriously. And do we need so many committees and do we need so many meetings for our own good? Because it doesn't appear sustainable at the moment. Probably the last 3 committees I've come to have not been quorate. Am I telling the truth, or I think one or two of us have got to admit that we've been up here recently and we just haven't managed to be quorate at all. So we must look at the overall picture of what we're doing and question the remit of the CA in trying to maintain 35 committees.
Yeah, I think you make a very, very valid point, Ian, and that's, that was part of the reason for when we did our governance review with the recommendation around a review of allowances, because we, as an overview and scrutiny committee, had really, really struggled with quorum for 3 years. Things have improved slightly, but we've really found it difficult. So I'm glad to see that that's been factored in. And I'm not sure whether Satish can confirm whether or not the number of committees has been looked at as part of the governance review or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you see the full results of the mapping exercise, you'll see that in the portfolio areas. And the councillor is absolutely right in that there are quite a lot of sort of entities of one form or the other. But what I would say is I don't think we're totally out of sync with some of the other CAs that we looked at. Yeah? So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But I think there is a need to rationalise, as I say. And I think when Julie takes you through how the economic governance will hopefully be much more streamlined and effective. If we can do the same in other areas like transport, housing and regeneration, I think that will make quite a significant difference, and also will home in the efforts of members, because it is quite difficult to participate in all the forums that you have at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree entirely with that. I think the thing for us is that if we're not quorate and we have too many inquorate meetings, it invalidates the work of the CA because you can't move your business along effectively, and we haven't got good cross-party democratic engagement. So, Dan, you wanted to come in on the quorum?
Yeah, just picking up Satish's point and to remind members, of course, since May, we've not been able to operate hybrid meetings in a proper legal sense, so that the two councillors that are joining us on Teams don't qualify in the calculation of the quorum. So I know all combined authorities, because I talk to colleagues in other parts of the country, are very much anticipating a change in the legislation that the government have indicated they're minded to do, which will allow members who are attending remotely to be counted as in attendance. Because as I say, you're familiar at the moment, you have to be physically in the room. And so given the experiences of the last 18 months, and I think there's a general consensus on how well that went, there's been quite a push from the sector to change the legislation and allow members attending remotely to be counted with quorum, and combined authorities, and I think those authorities with big geographical areas are very much welcoming that. And I know that the feedback I've had from members is again, that would be a real help. So we're awaiting that change. The government said they're minded to, but lots of things, it's parliamentary time that they need to schedule. So I think from my perspective, that can't go quick enough.
Thank you. I've got two final speakers. I've got Mike, and then finally I'll take Peter, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, it's an apology, please, to Lindsay. I've just emailed you to say, can you send me the slides? Because I assumed I'd either lost them or couldn't find them, or I dumped them or something. But presumably we are going to get them in eventually. As far as being quorate is concerned, I'm surprised that more people don't come. My Overview and Security Committee expect me to attend. You know, it's not a case of are you available? Okay, so sure, you know, if it's this meeting here, you will attend, and they expect me to do that. So I think, you know, I think it's getting to trouble if I didn't.
I do write, and I have, as Chair, I have written to members and to leaders asking them to ensure attendance, and if members can't attend, to provide a substitute, or if it's a problem going forward, to look for another member. There's nothing else that I can do from that point of view, but I have been keen to make sure that we don't let things slide, because if we do during the month, during the year, then we end up in the positions of not having been quorate and not being able to make a decision. Peter, final point.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from what Mike has just said, yes. First of all, with the Teams, I kind of support if we can get people with the quorate maybe to vote from online. Again, it's making sure that the reason why they are doing it online, whether it's illness or down to, I think it was a COVID of having to be at home for 5 or several days. Yes, we've talked about quorate before, Chair, and we've all agreed that when it goes forward to the Mets and somebody comes forward to come to the ONS or what other meetings, it's because you have put your name forward because you want to attend. And if you can't attend, as you've said, Madam Chair, is that then you have a sub. But sometimes you do question if somebody puts their name forward to attend these meetings and then don't turn up. I agree with you, it does actually tend to devalue the work that we do and all the people that are here today, and then we suddenly find we want to take things forward and we're not quorate. And I think it kind of just takes away the dedication to it in words. So we need to, with your letter as well, to reinforce that again. If you want to be on this ONS or indeed any others, then you've got to commit yourself or let somebody else, probably from their council, who say, well, actually, I'd like to have been on it, but I gave way to you, but you're not attending. And either I can be your sub or I will attend and we'll get some of the sub. But you've said with time and time again, we just have this situation that we're not quorate, and it's so wrong. If so, people that are on this, if they're going to say, I want to be on this, then please come along to the meeting.
You'll all be pleased to know that we are now quorum today.
Yes, now, Chair, we want it first.
Chair, technically, isn't the problem that the LEPs are absent en bloc again? And that drives down our percentage.
I had a discussion actually with Dan and Lindsay offline after the last meeting, because the LEPs have not attended anything this year. In fact, I can't remember the last time the LEPs attended anything. So actually, I'd had a conversation with Dan about should the LEPs actually be formally part of the meeting. They can have an invitation to attend, but should they actually be formally part of the meeting? Because if they're not attending, haven't attended, then what value have they brought? Dan, I think, I'm not sure whether we'd had a bit of a discussion. We hadn't kind of bottomed out whether we could do that formally, but that was certainly a conversation Dan and I had had.
Thanks, Chair, because that's really good.
Chair, I think, yes, we had had that conversation, and members will know there is governance work connected with LEPs more generally, and in a sense, the matter may resolve itself. But Councillor People, you're absolutely right, and well, without picking on LEPs, yes, anything not attending causes problems. The wider point I was just going to make is just for members to remember that this committee has a very high quorum, and that's specified in the order that established the CA. So there is nothing in that sense that we can do. So our quorum is 2/3. Now, the same applies for our audit committee, and they were the two committees in the order that established the CA that the government made that specified what the quorum would be. So we can't change that. All of our other committees and boards, in the same way as your own committees in your own authorities, the authority itself sets the quorum. So that may be, you know, 1/3, 1/2, but certainly a lower figure. So we're not comparing like with like, because all of the other boards that in the authority, you know, 99 times out of 100 are quorum. And I would say if we had a similar level of quoracy that the other boards had, we would be fine. It's just this unfortunate situation that the government has specified a very high quorum, and there's been a lot of correspondence with the government. You'll remember Tim Martin's predecessor spoke with civil servants, and whilst they were sympathetic, they didn't feel there was anything they could particularly do. So it's a legacy issue somewhat, and as I say, were we another committee, we would be fine because the turnout's really good. It's just that for scrutiny and for audit, we have this really high level which hits us. But perhaps, the same with the hybrid meetings, perhaps with changes in the LEP representation, that will all go towards and help in the situation.
Okay, thank you then. So to conclude this item, thank you for bringing the update back to us. I think it's been really useful, and glad to see that actually it's quite comprehensive in, you know, from where we were a few months ago. So I'm guessing that the next steps will be that, I think as Bob suggested, that the paper is going to board in January, and that's on implementation, I presume. Satish suggested that. So will we then have a further update on implementation proposals and process?
Yes, just to clarify, Chair, the item that will go to board in January will be in relation to the member remuneration panel that we're going to set up, right? The other recommendations will only go to board as and when they need any changes. For instance, the Economic Governance Board, that needs a change to the constitutions. Obviously, that will go forward in November, and the same will apply to other sort of changes that we make in transport and other areas. But the governance terms of reference were set by the mayors and leaders, and obviously there will be a document that will be available, but we're not taking that to anywhere. There's no need for it, I don't think. Did you want to say anything on that, Paul?
No, I think that's a technical position. The next piece of work we're going to do is a remuneration committee to set that up, and it's a work in progress for the rest of the things.
Thank you. We look forward then for an update on the work of the remuneration.
Chair, as we are now quorum, could I propose that we endorse the 6 recommendations and look forward to hearing progress on their implementation? So we seem to be in agreement with the thrust of them, albeit we want to see 1 or 2 of them and how they work out. But I think that way Scrutiny will have actually had an involvement in the process.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that if that's, yeah. So, yeah, do we agree with? Thank you. So thank you. So that's formally agreed then. Okay, thanks Bob. Thanks for attending. It's good to see you at
Good to see you all.
overview and scrutiny. Okay, so we move on with the agenda then. We're now going to move on to the economic governance paper, which is being presented by Julie Nugent. So Julie, over to you. Sorry, Nigel.
Chair, do we need to revisit the minutes that we deferred because we're Cora now?
Yeah, we can do. I'll take that after when we've done Julie's paper, and we can come back to that. Yes, so don't anybody run off. Julie.
Thanks, Chair. And in many ways, this is a bit of a continuation of a theme in that the proposals going to the November board are exactly as we've talked about, some quite specific recommendations to simplify, streamline, make sure that leadership around the economic piece is democratically accountable. And so hopefully very much in line with the discussion that you just had. And in many ways, it's the perfect example of how, for some good reasons, the current arrangements have been in operation for some time, but actually you wouldn't start here. So we've seen lots of different boards, not always clear what their role or remit is, if they've got decision-making powers or not, how they relate to each other and how they relate to the Combined Authority Board, where a lot of this work was being driven through the Strategic Economic Development Board, which itself was chaired by a LEP, and where the CA's portfolio lead for the economy didn't have a clear role. So it was a little bit of a confused picture, and I think this is the area that leaders asked us to focus on initially in terms of that broader review. So what we've done, I've worked very closely with Councillor Brookfield, the portfolio lead for the economy on this, is really trying to rationalise it to make sure that we're putting the work on economy front and central of the CA's decision making. One of the most important things we're doing, being very clear that this isn't just any economic growth, this has got to be good, green, inclusive growth, and that's absolutely a theme that will run through. Hopefully you'll see that in the proposals. Looking at membership, trying to have very much greater clarity around who's a member, where voting rights sit, we follow the constitution in that, but also recognising that this is a space where there's a key role for partners to come together as well. So whilst it's important that this is democratically accountable, it's also a recognition that the work on driving forward good economic growth has to bring together private and public sector partners as well. So trying to do that in a way that makes sense. It will be decision making, but we've also tried to be very clear on where and how the board makes decisions. So for me in particular, there's a real opportunity to look at the work that we do around economic growth, but how that needs to inform and be informed by wider CA activity. Things like housing, land, transport skills have all got to come together through this board. Decisions will still remain with the existing committees. So for example, transport, but actually this should be the place where the CA really looks at how we can best align some of those levers to deliver that kind of good growth. So we've also attached a work programme, and apologies, you will have had this paper late as well. It only went to Mayor and Met leaders on Friday. And what the work programme tries to set out is where would we expect the Economic Growth Board to make decisions, and where would we expect it to be informed by the work of other boards as well. So I think that's quite an important and hopefully a bit of a shift in how we're thinking about how we work. So trying to move away from perhaps some of the silos into understanding how we drive that kind of good growth. So quite a lengthy paper in some ways, but hopefully fairly clear and straightforward in terms of the proposals. This is deliberately seeking to streamline arrangements in the economic space. So I will pause there for any thoughts, questions, observations. That's okay, Chair?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Trickett.
Can I declare a non-pecuniary interest as a said board member?
Thank you. Okay, so open it up to the committee for questions to Julie.
Just a point, if I may. With these Economic Development Board, once they take the decision, has there been a discussion about the speed at which the finance will follow?
It's a good question. I think it depends on the decision. This board doesn't have a budget associated with it in the same way that the investment board does. So there are broader areas of activity. It's not being, obviously hasn't been formally constituted yet. But I think the recognition is that this should be able to drive forward growth at pace. That makes sense.
Understand where I'm coming from, in that once the decision is taken, we need the money to follow very quickly.
Yeah.
Because nothing happens until the money's in place.
Totally agree.
That's just a point.
Absolutely. I think some of this as well is making sure that where money sits within the CA in other areas, so for example on the skills budget, that's being aligned to support this rather than having to go through lots of different routes. But this board doesn't have its own budget per se, that's the investment board as well, so I think it's important that I clarify that.
But isn't that contradicting what we're doing? If you've got to go to an investment board, once the decision is taken, surely it should be done in one. Not go elsewhere as well.
It's already been sorted, isn't it?
So a lot of the work programme that's planned is about how we drive better results out of government, how we drive better results out of the work of the CA. So it's across the piece rather than having to then go to lots of different boards. But I take your point.
Aren't you building in procrastination?
I hope not. That's certainly not the intention. The intention here is to have a single board that is very clearly linked into the governance of the CA driving forward this at pace. And it will have leaders or their representatives around the table as well. So,
Now, hence the point that once the decision is made, the money should follow, as of norm.
You haven't got any money, you can't follow.
The point is the decision should be taken with the delegated decision in place. And once the decision is taken, the money should follow. Otherwise, we're creating a problem.
Thank you. Julie, is there anything else to add to that before I bring Lisa in?
you might want to come in.
Okay, so I've got Linda indicating on the board. Linda, can you shed any clarity on this?
So you're just trying to sort of help with that, really. So essentially, this board will have decision-making powers on certain elements, but in terms of where the investment is directed, what this board is there to do is to pull all of the regional strategy together, so that actually it defines and sets how the rest of the authority works, and the strategic piece that which the rest of the boards operate essentially. So absolutely, where there are specific small areas of work that the board can absolutely take decision, but the key bit of this board is to provide that framework within which everybody else then aligns and it drives their investment through in a targeted way.
Thank you. Lisa?
Just a couple of points. I suppose I made the point when we met with Julie previously that I do note that business continues to have, through the economic impact group and through this new business advisory group, two means of directly influencing the mayor, whereas I don't see any opportunity for our local communities to directly influence the mayor. And I would feel a lot happier if I saw some opening up from the mayor's office in terms of his willingness to be directly influenced by the communities we represent. My other concern is how this work plan reflects a very historic view as to how to secure economic growth, in particular inclusive growth. I'm interested that the mayor will meet with big businesses. This region is made up of small businesses. SMEs are the backbone of our economy and our growth. So again, the influence of the big businesses with, dare I say, vested interest suggests a continuance of the power of incumbency rather than this board moving to being a more democratic process. My other concern is we talk about clusters where there's going to be easy growth, in effect, quick growth. We've already seen with GKN that we will face in this region a really challenging transition where, because of Brexit, whereas because of low carbon and the move to automation, we will see jobs at risk and going. I would be much happier if I saw the words transition actually appearing once in this document. It doesn't appear once. And what this feels like is we will grow some glittery areas, the easy to grow clusters, and actually we run the risk of seeing a decline of the existing. And actually that is the very strategy that's failed the Black Country and communities within Birmingham for many, many years. So I appreciate this is an initial work programme, but I do think, you know, as we move on to the next agenda item, Adam's inserted the fine words inclusive green growth. Your terms of reference for your economic board do not bear out an understanding of how you're going to deliver that. Julie?
Yeah, totally take the point, and Liz, you know, we've spoken about this. I think the work programme makes reference to plan for growth, which will be part of the economic strategy going forward. We'll do exactly as you said, look at those areas that have the potential to grow and grow good jobs more quickly. But absolutely part of that has to be about how we support businesses to transition to new, particularly new net zero opportunities. And we know that a lot of our current industrial base, particularly SMEs in Birmingham and even more so in the Black Country, will struggle to do that without the necessary integrated approach across things like innovation, skills, business investment. So that has to be part of what this board does. And coming back to Councillor's early comment, making sure that we're driving up activity across the growth company, across LEPs, across local authorities, across the CA, because all of these things need to come together if we're to have, you know, a fighting chance of doing that. So I think that point is absolutely what the board has to focus on, and if nothing else, that plan for growth as we develop it has got to tackle those and make sure, and if we could be for a moment, but make sure that particularly around giving our residents the skills they need to take advantage of good jobs, because it's no point us just creating lots of fancy jobs that other people travel into our region to
Colleges that they can't actually.
Yeah, so it's very dear to my heart that we have to give our residents the opportunity to avail themselves of those jobs and the wealth that will bring, that high skill, the high wage economy we all want. In terms of the business reference groups, I think it's a point well made, and happy to take away an action if that's helpful to look at the broader community engagement strategy that the Mayor's Office, or to ask them to report back on that. I think for me it has to work two ways. I think, yes, the economic impact group, which is a very open forum where every fortnight the Mayor and officers hear from the chambers, the LEPs, businesses across the region to understand how it feels for them. I think the business reference group is also an opportunity for us to lobby and use the power of some of those businesses, particularly the large organisations, to lobby on our behalf rather than necessarily influencing. And there has been a deliberate move with the creation of this board to focus it much more in terms of that. And I keep saying that democratically accountable piece, rather than being chaired by the private sector, which is probably the biggest shift that we've seen from said board to this new board. It's absolutely with our locally elected politicians that are driving it, not business representatives. So I hope that point is well made.
Okay, thank you. I've got three other councillors wishing to speak. So I've got Simon, followed by Vera, followed by Liz.
Thank you, Chair. The focus that you brought back to on inclusive growth, absolutely. And I think all of us are really, really concerned that it has to be inclusive growth. I represent one of the worst skilled wards in a town which is at the bottom of the Staffordshire educational standards. It's not, I mean, it's something like the last count before COVID, 25% of people I represent have no formal qualifications. So, you know, the mechanisation and automation is going to smash through those communities even more than it has already. So we are desperate that it is inclusive growth that drives this. But to going back to the previous comment, a board with no budget is not going to drive strategy unless the system says that the investment board is going to follow that strategy. I had as part of the working group, I attended the investment board, and Councillor Slay was very good and insisted that as representative Scrutiny, I sat through the whole meeting, including the non-public bit. And it was fascinating to watch the jungle drums go into action and see the various authorities. You know, someone said, "Oh, but you haven't spent that 1.2 million." Yeah, well, I could spend it. So if you give it to me now, you know, and that's what really drives these things. So when my colleague says no budget, no listen, I suspect you're really going to have to work very hard to get the Strategic Investment Board to reflect what the Economic Growth Board. And I would echo what Councillor Trickett very articulately put. If we're just talking to the big businesses, you know, they will drive down jobs, and my people I represent, will be losing jobs faster than they're being created. So, and that's without the education access issues, which is another factor. So please, can we look at how we tie these objectives into budgets so that we don't just get a carve up at investment board based on who's the biggest, you know, sort of pusher in the jungle, and still meet your objectives, which are very laudable as expressed to us. It's whether they happen that's worrying us.
So just on that, and apologies because I haven't made it clear enough, the role of the Economic Growth Board has also got to be to drive the broader pockets of investment and funding that the combined authority has. So I have about 150 million of skills budget every year. So the Economic Growth Board has got to help me spend that and spend it well to make sure that we're giving people the right kind of skills now. So it's not, it sits there in splendid isolation without any powers of influence. But the Investment Board has some specific parts. Actually, this is about making sure we're aligning across all the investment, all the funding that sits in skills, in transport, in housing, that sits with the growth company. So we're using our available funds much more smartly than we have done and aligning in the same direction. So
can I just ask, would that mean that a report from you, from the Economic Board to the Investment Board, would be saying these are our objectives, therefore in allocating funds from your whatever pot, these are the key objectives? Would they actually state that in reports going to the Investment Board, so they would have to take a conscious decision?
So the Skills Board, if I just use that as an example, doesn't go to the Investment Board.
No, but that's the point. I think we're all fine with the one that comes within your ambit, because your ambit will focus. The question is, if you've set inclusive economic growth as our #1 key factor, when it goes to Investment Board, will a proposal say what it will do to deliver inclusive economic growth, not economic growth, because that's what we're worried about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I keep saying we. I think I'm representing people.
No, it has to, otherwise there's no point. And Councillor Brookfield in particular has been very clear. This has got to be a board with real power and real teeth. So that absolutely is the plan. But not just targeting the investment programme. I think it has to be much wider than that. It has to be making sure that the work that we're doing, both in the CA but across the broader partnership, we're all focusing in the same direction. So if we're attracting, so you know, focusing on low carbon industries, focusing on tech and professional services, that we're all doing that and we're all joining up, and that drives an activity across the CA and across its partners too, and targets government for further investment and targets the private sector for further investment. So it's across that whole piece. This is a different way of working for us though, so you know, there's absolutely the ambition for it. But coming back to the point about skills and qualifications, absolutely, for me, the inclusive growth pieces has to be how we're giving residents the opportunity to access those growth areas, because the projections that we've done, if you look at the data, even where there is automation, that will drive up productivity, but it will reduce employment. So we've got to be thinking ahead now and getting ready and capitalising on those opportunities.
I'm going to bring Linda in. Linda?
Yeah, I think hopefully sort of Julie's clarified it there actually from my perspective, and having, you know, been responsible for leading that sort of holistic planning process, the in terms of ensuring that we are driving our investment into the right areas, this is a really helpful, for me, step forward in terms of what this board will be doing. Will be having the responsibility to lead the whole strategic aims and objectives of the authority and to set where the authority should be directing and targeting its money. And it will be incumbent on all the other boards through the single assurance framework and the approval processes to ensure, and through the organisations 5-year and annual business plan, that actually the strategic aims that are set by this board are delivered and are the places where the money is targeted. So one of the criteria when proposals will go into investment board will be strategic alignment, and whether it is the right thing to do. Investment board will be needing to assure themselves that their investment, should they approve it, absolutely meets the strategic aims and objectives set by this board, and that they are therefore ensuring that this is the appropriate use of the money. So I'm hoping through process that actually the whole, well, I'm not hoping, through process this whole thing will be linked up in terms of feeding through into the planning process and how we optimise our funding, and down into ensuring all of the boards are conscious of the criteria set by this board.
Thanks, Linda. I'll come to you in a minute, Mike. I've got a couple of other speakers. Vera?
Just to point what Lisa said regarding the mayor not being reachable to communities, what he done during his campaign was an Ask Andy session, and he done it in different areas, and that went down really well. I don't know, we've got the authority to ask him if he could actually do some of those for the community, so as he is approachable for them, and they could actually then have their say.
Lisa?
When we did I think some of the Ask Andys, I think all of us politicians do things during our political campaigning that really actually we ought to maintain when we're in office. But there is obviously different governance forms, and certainly I know the Ask Andy that was held in the area I live was held in a pub, and that would not be accessible to many people within the community. I think what we ought to look at is things like, I know that the North West Mayor, Andy Burnham, does open questions. He does public questions to the Mayor. And it is again just that importance of the public actually just feeling they can express a view. And a bit like your comments last time and Liz's point, that I do have this continued fear at the moment that Julie's a really admirable exception to this. Quite a lot of people who are making decisions about where to take policy and plans in our region don't actually live in our city or region. So actually getting to actually hear directly the lived experience, I think should be a really important part of the policy development process.
Thanks. I think I would support your comments, Vera, about however it looks and however it happens, that public and community engagement is absolutely critical, isn't it? So, I think that's something that we would want to reflect back to, not just to the Mayor, but to the leadership team, that actually public engagement, because at the end of the day, the public are the recipients of the investment that the CA has, so it has to work for them. I've got Liz and then Mike, and then I'm going to move on from this session. Liz?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of queries, and I found the presentation that you said, Bertie, again, was very clear. But then I look at the structure chart, and it still looks like quite top heavy. And I can see in the terms of reference, there's an asterisk saying that the Innovation Board will be directly accountable to this board. But then there's the other boards in this block, like the Energy Capital and the Cultural Leadership Board, where that seems to still be floating. And then I just, in terms of key sectors that are going to be there as non-voting members, I don't see anyone there from the cultural industries and from arts, the arts sector. And I think that I think that's a voice that should be there. And then just a final commentary, just in the work programme, there's a reference to this board, playing a role in energy policy, although it won't be driving it. But I want to know, if we're talking about green inclusive growth, what exactly is the foundational position there? Is it divestment? Is it moving away from fossil fuels and the green transition, or exactly what is it? And if it's not that, what value is it going to add at all? And then the other question was, what is this? And excuse my ignorance, the Energy Capital Board. What is that?
Bunch of business.
Control yourself. But I just think that if we're talking, because I thought the comment that Ian made about the proliferation of meetings is absolutely germane. It's also to be part of the Transport Committee, and then suddenly I'm on 3 or 4 other committees that I actually didn't volunteer for. So I think then I look at this and I just see another block of different bodies, with unclear reporting lines.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think the challenge for this board is how do you have the voice of the sector, as you mentioned with, for example, cultural leadership, but not have everyone round the table and vested interests. So what we have agreed with Councillor Brookfield is one of the early decisions of the board will be that rationalisation of all of the groups that currently sit underneath it. What we've done so far is pull them together. So actually we now have a list, which we didn't have before. We're much clearer about who's on the board. Yeah, it's a start. Who's on the board? Is it? And they really vary. So cultural leadership is a group of people that are very involved in clearly the cultural industry. They're not making decisions per se, which is different again to energy capital. So some of this is actually trying to be very clear about who's on these groups, what they're there to do. A lot of them, if I'm honest, are advisory, but they don't know that. They think they're decision making, or they're a little confused. So some of this is being very, very clear with how do we engage with a broad church of interest, and culture is a really good one where it's important to understand. Now, that might not be that there's a representative from the culture industry on the Economic Growth Board, because if you follow that logic, then everybody wants somebody on there. But we have to make sure there's a very good engagement process for culture, for energy, for manufacturing across the piece. So that's part of what the new board will be looking at and making decisions early on. The Innovation Board is again, a group that's been in existence for some time that drives a lot of what we're doing in the CA. And again, this is making sure it's plugged into that democratic process rather than operating in isolation. So more work to do here. I think we've got a good handle on it now. There'll be some clear recommendations coming forward where we are much more precise about who's on these groups and why, whether they're there to inform, to represent, or to make decisions. And in the case of the latter, it won't be because they're not decision making. And then in terms of energy capital, yeah, I think that's one that currently reports into the Environment Board that Councillor Courts is chair. Oh no, I think I'm looking at Adam now. It has a relationship there. There's work that it's doing around net zero with Ed, and then clearly there's an economic piece. So that's a group, again, there's some good people around the table, but some mixed interest that we are making sure we're very clear about how it aligns with that broader strategy. Because at the moment, if we're honest, part of what the governance review has unearthed is that it's kind of there doing lots of different things without necessarily being clear about how it then reports back up into the CA board.
Okay, thank you for that. Mike?
Yeah, very quickly, Chair. I think we got the name wrong. From what I've heard over the last 20 minutes or so, the West Midland Economic Growth Board should simply be called the West Midland Strategic Growth Board, because it seems to me that the economy is money to me, and therefore that's the investment board and the housing board have got money. And so this board appears, in my view, to deal with a strategic level of things. I mean, we've been told it's a framework organisation. So, you know, it would, to me, renaming it strategic would be much better.
Comment? No, it's helpful, and I think that's a good way of saying that's how we want it to work as a strategic framework, driving out decisions across a number of, without overstepping, but being the place where we look at these things in the round. So,
I'll change the name, please.
If only I had that power, but thank you.
I'll have a word with Andy. Well, actually, Chair, just being pedantic, as an O&S meeting, if we were to agree on that, if that was important, could we not recommend it? Can it not be a recommendation?
I've made a number of notes as people have been speaking, so my intention at the end was to say these are the comments that we would, from overview and scrutiny, want including or looking at in terms of the paper. So I think we'd, you know, the name of the board, does it make it clearer? Does it make any difference to what it does? I suppose is the question. But I've got a few things here that I've jotted down, which I'll pull together at the end. So very final point, Naeem.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being late. My question is, the objective and aim of this board are very similar to the local enterprise partnerships. And currently, we are working very closely with the labs to achieve the economic growth for the region. So what will be the future of the labs, and how we can work with them if we have our own investment board?
Thanks for a nice easy question there. So we are absolutely aware that there's a piece of work going on nationally through government now looking at the future of LEPs. I think what we are doing in the region is recognising that whatever happens, we want to have a very strong focus on good economic growth through the CA, and that will involve LEPs or daughter of LEPs or whatever comes. So rather than waiting for government to pronounce, we've gone ahead. We're working really closely with the LEPs on this. We had the last SED board, it was a couple of weeks ago, and we're making sure that we transition to new governance without dropping anything along the way. I think we'd all recognise it's quite a fragmented landscape at the moment, so it's really important that we align and we work together moving forward. And then whatever happens, the West Midlands has got a very strong view of how it wants to do good partnership. And we pick up with whatever government gives us, but we can't answer that question at the moment, and we weren't prepared to wait for government to pronounce.
Okay, thank you. So just to conclude then, the points that I've noted down that we felt were missing from this paper, we needed more clarity on, was community involvement and how that might work. The issues that Lisa raised around SMEs, and the looking at the board membership. So taking your point that you can't have everybody at the table, but it is making sure that the right people are there at the right time, and whether there's any availability to pull or co-opt people into it as appropriate. Yeah. Have I missed anything?
That's right. You change the name, Chair.
The change of name. That's really helpful, Chair. Thank you very much for everyone's
Sorry,
comments.
Chair. I do apologise.
Okay.
The transition point.
Oh, yeah, sorry, the transition point as well.
Yeah.
Anything else I've missed? No? Okay, lovely. Thanks very much, Jude, for that. Just before you leave, because the next item on the agenda is the Black Country, the response, Laura Shirt's response to the Black Country Review, and actually on that page 12, you won't have that, I don't think. So part of the Black Country Review, one of the actions was that the chair and members of the Economic Growth Board to consider as part of their developing work programme the requirements and differences of sub-regions, including the Black Country. So I think in terms of that letter, it's just confirming that that is part and parcel of the remit.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the work that will inform the plan for growth is looking in particular where opportunities are, but how they play out across different sub-regions, and the transition point again. Yeah, that's absolutely. Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, folks. So just before we move on to what was agenda item 6, which is now agenda item 8. If we can just confirm the minutes of the last 2 meetings, because we are now quorate. So can I have those not formally agreed? Go on.
Can I move them, Chair?
You can move them. Simon, would you like to second them?
I think by convention, Chair, I can only move the first lot because I wasn't at the Q&A. But I'm happy to second that if I'm now permitted to by the Chair.
So you'll move the first one. And do I have a seconder for the second set of minutes? Thank you. Sorted. So we can move on then to what has now become item number 8. This is just the response from Laura Shoaf on the deep dive into the Black Country Review that we did last year. You'll recall that the previous response was rather bland and lacked detail. So we've now had a second, slightly more detailed response on that. From my point of view, there's a couple of things that we wanted to pick up. So action 2 on page 12, the overview and scrutiny committees should consider if it would be helpful to repeat the deep dive into local skills delivery. That's something that Lisa and I will discuss and come back on, purely because of the work that Lisa did on the last review and the length of time and the detail that it took. Whilst we don't want to repeat what has already been done. So it's making sure that it's fit for where we are now. Mike?
Yeah, very quick. I do apologise again. Me and my bonnet, the fact that the West Midland combined only goes down to 16, when really if we're going to get kids interested in engineering and all the things that the West Midlands are concerned about, we need to go a lot lower. And I appreciate that nobody has got that right, but somehow or other, I believe we do need to get lower in the age range to get kids children enthused with the things that we want to do.
And that was very much picked up from the Black Country Review when we discussed and talked about the first 1,000 days of a child's life being absolutely critical to setting the future path. But we accept and acknowledge the limitations that the Combined Authority has in that, but that doesn't stop it being an influencer with the local authorities and within the health remit. So absolutely, completely agree with that. So in terms of that, the response from Laura, I don't know whether, I mean, it probably won't mean a great deal to many of you because I think there was only Lisa and I who did that review, who are present now. I've just got a point on action about the time frame. Yeah, Lisa, was there anything you wanted to add into that?
Thanks, Chair. I think, and it may well be that action point 1 will address this, but the point on action point 3 that inclusive growth is about bringing perspectives on education, health, and other areas. Inclusive growth is how you do growth. If you're going to be inclusive, you actually have to start at understanding the point that your communities are at, how you drive the skills, how you start from the education point to secure that inclusive growth. I'm just slightly worried by the wording of action 3 that we still seem to have this view that you do growth and then you ameliorate the risk by doing a few nice things around health, training and skills. And again, that approach is what's failed so many communities in our area. If you're on about inclusive growth, you have to start at the point of understanding how you grow and intervene and invest in your area.
Yeah, correct. I agree.
Adam, I don't know if there's any comments you want to make on that, because I know you help pull things together.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, well made. I think the intention here was more where, I don't know if there's an effort, an item on the way that mental health in the region is limiting participation in the labour market, or on technical education, for example, where it might be particularly relevant to bring in a certain director. That's what action 3 alludes to. I think what you're describing, Councillor Trickett, is more in item 1, is how do we make sure that the committee is considering a growth model that is going to work for different parts of the region.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it is worth just noting the final sentence in number 1, which ultimately it's a board decision where the funds are invested to the greatest regional benefit. So I think that's incumbent on us all to make sure that we're either lobbying in the right ways or that we're actually holding the board to account on the decisions that it takes. So is everybody happy then with Simon?
Chair, I wasn't going to comment on Black Country, but could I just pick up on the point that Councillor Trickett's just made? I think, and the response, that maybe we should note that item 1, recommendation 1, is to deliver inclusive economic growth based on our communities and taking those communities forward. And that's our understanding. That will then go on record. And if in future we don't think it's doing that, we can reasonably then come back and say, well, we all agreed that on that day and it's here in writing. Can I just propose that as a suggestion to back up what Councillor Trickett said?
I think Adam's comment, if we've mentioned that correct, that the emphasis has to be that what we want is an inclusive growth model, not growth plus inclusive action.
That's really what I'm saying, is can we note that that's what we discussed today, so that it's there on the record for the future?
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy for that to happen. Okay.
Can I just add one thing? One size doesn't fit all, and I found that because I've been a community worker most of my life, and you like I'll give you an example. You could set up a course in Brownhills and try and do exactly the same course in Darlaston, and it just wouldn't work. Although they're local people, you can't just judge a book by its cover. You have to work with what you've got.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's about inclusive growth, isn't it? Because it's about being adaptable to the landscape and responsive to your communities. That's right. Absolutely agree that point. Okay, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, just I'm certainly welcome on inclusive growth. I think we always have to bear in mind as well when looking at young people, and it's also nice to see young people and others in manufacturing, because we can't lose and can't afford to lose our manufacturing base. However, the young people now are very savvy as they're being brought up on school and colleges on technology, on computers, etc., etc. So I think as well, it's you're right, not one size fits all, but it's actually identifying what people would like to do as a career, because we have to ensure that we are not pushing people in, well, therefore we need that, so we're going to push you in that direction. So identifying what the skills that they require, what jobs they want to do, what skills are missing, and how we move that forward to enable them to, I'll use a word, yes, to be motivated and aspirational to do the job that they would like to do, and even in time they may actually upskill themselves to do other things. So it's just bearing in mind that it's actually what the person wants and making sure that we can work around that throughout the West Midlands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm noting the time, which is now 3:30, so apologies from me as chair, because my timings are now all out. So in order to either get through the agenda fully, do I have committee's permission to go past 4 o'clock? Otherwise, we will need to just give a team at 4, dependent on where we are.
I will have to leave about 4:30 because I've got another meeting, so.
Okay.
I've got to be back by 7 for a meeting in town hall.
I'll try not to keep you any longer than that. But in terms of if we do run over just by a short time, is that acceptable for people?
It's a short time, Chair, because I do have another meeting at 4:30.
Right, well, that will keep us all focused. Okay, lovely. So I'm going to move then on to Adam's presentation on agenda item 9.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll therefore keep my intro brief, particularly because this item came along to the last committee meeting. So just to remind members of context, so after the mayoral election in May, we embarked upon the creation of a corporate strategy that in one place pulled together what the combined authority was going to focus on for the 3-year mayoral term. And that was, although it was timed after mayoral election, was very much about the priorities of the 7 local authority leaders and the mayor as the membership of the board, and how we can ensure that they flow through to organisational activity. We've been through a range of different consultations in order to develop this document, so most intensely with local authority leaders to make sure that we were really clear on the scope of activity of the organisation, but also with WMCA staff to ensure that they're engaged, with members of the young combined authority to ensure that the youth voice was part of this activity, as well as me and my colleagues doing kind of roadshows to other boards and committees to make sure that this dovetailed with and therefore will inform the work of particular portfolio members. So following that work, you have the document you see in front of you. Although it's now kind of flashily designed up with a few images, it is much the same or very similar to the document that you would have seen, the slides you would have seen a month or so ago. And there are some notable differences. One of the key things we've actually done is slim down the document. So a big bit of feedback was similar to a comment made previously. The scope here is quite broad. Do we need to narrow it and really focus in on core areas of activity? So we've gone from 36 objectives to 25, really making sure that the areas of focus are clear and crisp. We've also, as Councillor Trickett alluded to earlier on, made sure that language of inclusive economic growth is clear throughout, and the relationship between what aims 1 and aims 2 is clearer. This document went to the Mayor and Met leaders on Friday for their comment and discussion. And we've got some few comments that we're taking away there on some of the wording and some of the language, but broadly it appears that the Mayor and Met leaders are content. And so pending today's discussion, this is going to go through to the WMCA board on the 19th of November, but we do have the rest of this week to make any amendments or changes, hence why I wanted to bring it to this meeting for pre-decision scrutiny. So happy to take comments, questions, if there are any.
Thank you for that. So as Adam has said, this is a pre-decision scrutiny piece which actually adds the real value of this committee. So I've got Lisa who wants to come in.
Firstly, really just to thank you, Adam. It's quite nice to actually read a revised document that actually picks up on the comments of scrutiny. So clearly, we very much welcome that. I think Kathy and I just had a brief side about it, that I think the important thing is I actually think this is a really well written document. I think it reads well. It tells me a lot more about what the combined authority does. It shows that it's run by a bunch of men. So I don't quite identify with it. What I think is the slightly worrying issue is that when you actually look at the investment profile, which again, I think is really, really helpful, just to broken it down, that unless we actually revisit our investment programme and what we are doing with some of our grants and budgets, then actually we won't follow up on the fine words. So I suppose we're coming back to the earlier discussion on the growth plan. If we develop a growth plan that's business as usual and goes for the easy to reach quick growth sectors, then actually you won't deliver on your corporate objectives. So I think from my perspective, I accept the challenge that as scrutiny, we will hold the executive to account to actually deliver on these aims and objectives. Adam?
So one of the bits of work, and thank you, Councillor Stricker, for the comments on the amendments. I mean, Sarah and my team is on the call, has been working really hard on this document. I think the work that we're going to do once this has been agreed is to try and make sure that it's part of the wiring of the combined authority. So every report going to our senior leadership team, everything going to the investment board, we'll say which of these aims and objectives is this delivering, to make sure that it becomes part of the DNA of the organisation. So I very much welcome scrutiny, making sure that we live up to that, because it's very much what we're planning to do.
I'll bring Linda in next and then Nigel. Linda?
Again, just from me, this is a really important document for me, because what it's doing is, again, is setting out those aims and objectives within which we will align and consider the budget that will come through for pre-budget scrutiny and through into January and February. So what we'll expect is the whole budget, the whole authority's budget, to be aligned to these aims and objectives, and you can clearly see what it's delivering. And that, as you say, will be the wiring into how we can then monitor in year both the funding and the performance against those aims and objectives. So I think hopefully it's a really helpful document.
Thank you for that. Nigel?
Yes, thank you. Going to aim 5, I wasn't really sure what this was trying to get at, other than you want to devolve powers. Certainly it's got no what's needed, why it's needed, and how you want to achieve that, other than you're just going to go and talk to government for the power. And then it suddenly hit me that actually aim 5 is written the wrong way around. If aim 5 was to demonstrate the strength of our regional partnership to secure new powers and resources from central government, that would actually identify what you want to do and how you can achieve it. It's just a slight, because I think the second part of that sentence there, the aim, is lost, because everybody will just focus on that first bit, where actually the other way around is quite important.
Yeah, I welcome that comment. I think that is a change we can make. I think, and I take your point, that the main thing we're doing is demonstrating the strength of our partnership in order to secure the powers. In some ways, that lobbying, public affairs engagement bit is very much the last mile of the activity. Although I would just highlight that it's it's quite an important last mile. That actually one of the things we've noticed from other regions and their ability to secure resources is that they articulate their case well and engage well with government. And so just wanted to make sure that there was a marker in this corporate strategy for that activity. And but yeah, I think you're right on switching the wording around, and we'll pick that up.
Thank you. Naeem?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to know what new power are you seeking from the government?
We have a 2-page DEVO submission that we've put in ahead of the Levelling Up white paper. I'm very, very happy to circulate that to the committee following this session if it hasn't been already. It may have, it's certainly been to leaders and others. And very quickly, those break into 3 buckets. One around human capital, how can we get skills and actually education funding, so around T-levels, devolved to the region to deploy in line with our priorities. Second one around growth and enterprise, so we've got some asks there around things like foreign direct investment, financial inclusion for businesses, and then a third bucket around net zero, so how can we get funding around retrofit EV charging. But that's all laid out in a couple of pages, which is what we've used with any political stakeholders or officials in government, and I'll make sure that gets shared with the committee.
Did you want to come back on that? No. Sarah, did you want to add anything because you've appeared on screen?
No, just that the comments, especially to amend AIM 5, make sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just pick up on AIM 6.6, where it says that you will involve citizens, which actually supports the comments we made in the previous session. Obviously, don't expect the detail now, but I do think there's a real piece of work to do there, because at the end of the day, you know, as Lisa's alluded to, and I'm glad Lisa picked it up so I didn't have to, was around the gender and the BAME makeup of the leadership. So to make sure that, you know, we are absolutely reflective and understand exactly what it is that our communities want. You know, Birmingham being the youngest borough in Europe, or West Midlands being one of the most ethnically diverse regions. So to make sure that that is well and truly reflected, I do believe that you've got to have really effective citizen engagement. So I'll be interested to see how that pans out and have more detail on that going forward. But can I just pick up one other point, which, and I'm presuming that there's detail behind each of these aims that sits elsewhere, that you've got paper that supports that detail, and obviously we don't have that. But aim 3.4, and clearly I haven't picked this up at the last time, and I haven't read it well. Bullet point 3, where it talks about the one public estate and the efficient development and disposal of public land and buildings. And I just wondered where the detail behind that sits, where the information to support that recommendation, so we can understand exactly what that is referring to in terms of public assets, and to be assured that it isn't a way of, we're not stripping out public assets without putting anything back. We're not selling off the family silver and stripping it out for future generations.
So if I could take 6.6 and then 3.4 in turn. So on citizen engagement, I completely agree, and was one of the officers that that I work on the citizens panel we used to inform some of our COVID recovery work, and I really do want to see that sort of approach weaved into how the combined authority do things. And I would really welcome, because sometimes there are controversies around getting those sorts of activities through, and so I very much welcome a sort of minuted support from this committee that we should be exploring those activities as we do this work. On 3.4, so the Public Land Task Force is very much about, and the Public Land Charter that I believe has just gone through Housing and Land Delivery Board is very much about aligning around a particular approach across the region and not getting into individual schemes or assets, and that's why I think the language is around supporting partners at a regional level as opposed to taking that activity ourselves. However, that has gone through Housing and Land Delivery Board. That's where the detail sits. So I'll make sure I get the latest to you through Dan. And if you want to pick anything up, Gareth Bradford's the relevant officer inside the combined authority that leads that work.
Okay, thank you. I think it is quite important that we keep an eye on that particular piece. Do I have any other, Vera, one last comment from you?
On 6.6. that people being able to understand, I'm going to put it in line simple layman's so there's the way it's written down there. People being able to understand what's going on, basically, that's what it says, yeah? Right, now where that ought to start again is in schools. Learn children to understand the basics of this, so as when they leave school and they come to do whatever they're going to be doing, they've got a lot more understanding. Now, when I was at school, we done something called integrated humanities, and a lot of that was along the lines of a bit of everything, and it did stead me forward to understanding a lot more than what I'd done, and that's what they should be having. They should be having some sort of education, basic education, to understand things like this.
I would quite agree. Unfortunately, that's not ever going to be.
I know it's not ours, is it? I know, but it's.
But I totally agree with you, and it comes back to the comments that we made earlier about true inclusive growth. If you don't give young people the tools, they cannot hope to play a significant role in the future.
No, that's right.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. Thank you for bringing up the point about one public estate. In our own town, obviously we're an NCA, but we recently had a clash where there was an area that the council had acquired, which was fine, but then the police were selling off a neighbouring site and sold it off separately because the police funding formula from the Home Office means that they were interested in capital, not revenue, whereas everybody else who was around that area was looking at revenue. The county council that had a neighbouring site, and it seems there's quite a lot of conflict between different public bodies as to what they want out of their redundant sites, and the net result is the community loses out. So I think that's a really important message to go back. But can I just say I was really pleased, like Councillor Trickett was, that what we'd said at the last meeting was reflected back in what's come, and I welcome that. And if it's agreed, then we would endorse that, because I think it's a good policy on scrutiny to endorse things that are positive as well as negative, because it encourages. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think I would absolutely support that. Yeah, so I don't think the committee would have any problem with the endorsement with some of the additions that we've discussed this afternoon. Peter, very final comment from yourself.
Just a quick one. I certainly agree with what Lisa made a comment of how it's well placed. It's quite an enjoyable document, Adam, to read. Actually, it was very well. I particularly like the talk about growth and jobs and opportunity, and particularly on 3, Chair, about the housing, connectivity and regeneration, and also one of my favourites as well is on 4, where you talked about the carbon and the funding and grants opportunity. 5 is good as well, as is 6. And it's talked about young people and again skills team, and talked about the citizen engagement and needs, and I think it was mentioned as well about the diversity, so that's very much welcome. Just a final question is that with the Mets that I've been looking at this, just for my information or others, do the non-Mets see this and have any comments at all, or is it just for the West Midlands Met? Adam, thank you.
We have engaged on the way with non-constituent authorities. So certainly at the beginning of this work, when we started scoping it, and I believe an update went to the most recent meeting of non-constituent authority leaders. So we provided updates along the way. But given this is primarily about the resources of the command authority, and they're primarily focused on the 7 Mets, that's where the bulk of the engagement.
Sure, understood. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So following the presentation then and Councillor Peoples' recommendation that we endorse the document with some of the additional comments that have been made today, but nevertheless we absolutely welcome it. And I think in terms of scrutiny going forward, it makes it much easier and much more it's far clearer for us to be able to hold the Mayor and the board to account on the things that they're responsible for delivering, because it sets it out in a much clearer fashion. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to move on then. Grant register, agenda item 11. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. So a relatively short update on the grants register from this month, reflecting relatively low activity coming in. So there are only 2 new grants that we've taken in. This one is the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement, just over £1 billion, and also a Find Your Futures grant from the European Social Fund as well. That should come in. So those are only 2 new updates.
Thanks for that. I'm guessing that it's just an item for noting. I'm guessing there's no further comment on it. Lisa?
I suppose what I am interested in more probably in terms of sort of a trend. I'm conscious that I think we only got half of what we asked for in terms of the transport fund, so that puts at risk some of the investments. So one of the things I'm keen to do is when we receive the grant register, we actually, quite frankly, I do find it interesting. I like lists and stuff, but it's the so what that I'm really keen to understand. What I'm also keen to understand is I'm highly conscious that in European social funds coming to an end, as is ERDF, we have a responsibility to make Brexit work in this region. And what I'm keen to understand is, as the monies come through to replace ESF and ERDF, actually how much have we lost? Because certainly when you compare what we would have got through ESF and what we're getting, say, through Community Renewal Fund, we have a much lower take in terms of resources. And again, I think it's really important that we have a shared understanding of the real challenges we're up against, because that is then how both the executive and ourselves can actually ensure that there is good policy.
Okay.
Certainly in terms of the CRSTS fund, obviously we knew that was a programme that was to board. In terms of that, and I believe there is a further update coming to board in January, I believe, on the forward plan for that to talk about what the programme will be. Certainly in terms of the analysis, so it's not since work with Adam and Adam's team around the analysis around kind of ESF and the RDF. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments from anybody? No? Okay, thanks very much for that, Kate. And I think it is proving valuable and useful. Just very quickly, I think there are 2 additional funds that I picked up through the budget. One was called the Multiply Fund, which was going to be for adult skills for maths specifically for the region, and also an additional fund of, I think it was 800 million divided between ourselves and the North East about electric vehicles, but it wasn't specific about what that was for, whether it was for batteries, development, building, whatever. It didn't tell us. Adam, you can update.
Yeah, so the multiply scheme is 500 million. That's actually taken from the overall quantum for the Shared Prosperity Fund of 2.6, which is frustrating. And that is going to the documents that would be focused on areas of highest need, including the West Midlands, Yorkshire and the Humber. So I think we can expect a reasonably significant amount of that. The challenge is going to be, and this comes to my earlier answer on devolution, how we can make sure it aligns with our education budget, because obviously quite a significant overlap in those 2 funds, but we've already started conversations with officials on it. I believe the 800 million for electric vehicles is part of the 1.4 billion Britain Global Investment Fund, essentially the sort of FDI promotion fund that's been launched within BEIS, a portion of which was earmarked for electric vehicle companies to attract them and then give kind of financial incentives for them to relocate. So trying to have more like a Nissan model in Sunderland type approach to economic development. I believe that fund's going to be administered from within BEIS, and so that 800 million, you'll probably never see an itemised list of where that's gone. It will be here is how BEIS has directed that funding, and here are some of the firms that might have relocated due to it.
Okay, that's helpful, isn't it, with public money that's not going to be clearly accountable for. But thank you for that. If you can just keep us appraised on any developments within that. Peter, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Adam. While I was looking at that and seeing some areas that are mentioned, but I do recall Councillor Simpkins, I think it was, on the Black Country, although I know we've talked about the Black Country, but the one thing I was conscious of is where we've got funding coming in, is that Councillor Simkin was also saying from Wolverhampton area chair that he didn't think there was a fair balance of where money was being spent. So through you, Chair, how do we ensure that there is, where possible, a fair balance between all the Mets where money is being spent? Of course, it depends on what particular thing you're going for, issue and item, but it's just that trying to keep an equilibrium if we can. Just your thoughts, Adam. Thank you.
So this comes back to the first main recommendation for Black Country Scrutiny Review, which is that's made so much harder the more fragmented the landscapes becomes. And we are in a really fragmented national landscape. So when we saw the Levelling Up Fund, 3 projects there for Birmingham, 1 for Wolverhampton, but then when the Community Renewal Fund out, that's much more skewed towards the Black Country in terms of where the funding's gone. So I do think we're going to have to recognise that as different funds come through, those numbers might go up and down in different places. The role that we need to play is just keeping that holistic picture. And I think things like the kind of paper that Kate's bought and others will help to do that. But it's certainly going to be an iterative process, trying to understand what this means for the region as a whole.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. So we note that paper then. Ian, did you want to come in on that? You're looking quizzical.
Let it go.
Let it go.
Let it go, let it go.
Okay, so we know that paper then is for the aims and objectives. We endorsed that as a committee, and obviously we've made some comments around the clarity of 1 or 2 items, but that's helpful. Sorry, I've got myself completely confused here. It's my age. Hang on, that's my excuse. Kate, thank you for your paper, and we know papers for noting. We accept that. But if you can keep us up to speed on the additional funds that we've highlighted and how that if we are likely to see and have any accountability for them within the region. Okay, and then my other mess up of the day, we should have gone straight to the air quality one and not to the grant register. So my big apologies to you, Jackie, if you'd like to come to the table.
I've been looking for Jackie. It's just been
I did have some PowerPoint slides, but I know you're running short on time, so I'll just talk you through where we're at with the air quality work. Can everybody hear me okay? Do you want the mic? Put it on.
That's fine.
Okay, so for those of you I haven't met previously, I'm Jackie Homan. I'm Head of Environment at the West Midlands Combined Authority, and Jake Fresh is also here with me from Transport for West Midlands, who leads on air quality for TFWM. I'm here to talk about the air quality paper. It was due to be a pre-decision paper, but on Friday, the Mayor and Met Leaders meeting made a decision to remove it from the November board agenda while they're waiting for the Environment Bill to receive royal assent. So as many of you know, the Environment Bill is currently in the pipeline. It's been delayed a number of times due to COVID, and now it's in the amendment stage. So it's going between the House of Lords and the House of Commons, trying to agree on metrics, one of which relates to air quality. And so the decision on Friday was, let's wait until we've got that certainty from the Environment Bill, both in terms of targets around air quality as well as process. So just to wind back a little bit, and I'd like to pass on my thanks to councillors Fowler, Clements and Waters for being part of a small working group who worked with us to develop the air quality paper. We've been working along with the WM Air project at the University of Birmingham, and we've had a secondment from that project. They've done an awful lot of monitoring and activity around understanding regional air quality. And in particular, one of the areas that we're expecting to see increased regulations as part of the Environment Bill is around particulates. So local authorities are already doing a significant amount around NOx and NO2, and that's also picked up by TFWM through an environmental protection group and the work around the local transport plan. So there's quite a lot of work happening around that pollutant. What we're expecting through the Environment Bill is an increased emphasis on particulate matter. The difference with particulates is they live longer in the atmosphere. So whereas NOx can be dealt with effectively locally because the effects are felt close to the source, particulates, the boundaries around those are a bit more fuzzy. Also, the sources of particulates relate to transport, particularly through tyres and brakes, but about half of the emissions we see in the West Midlands come from domestic combustion and industrial combustion as well, so the sources are different. And that requires a different way of tackling particulates. We don't yet know what standards the Environment Bill will put around particulates, but the work that the WM Air project has done shows that just under 1,400 people across the West Midlands die early as a result of particulate air pollution, so it's a significant issue for the region. The Environment Bill is also likely to come with new powers around air pollution, particularly this issue of air quality partners, which will require a collaborative or an increased collaborative approach around addressing air quality. So it will be the case that local authorities will still be required to produce air quality action plans, but with the option to pull in air quality partners to support with that. The piece of work we did with Birmingham University has identified a potential 121 different interventions that could be put in place to address air quality that cover areas like transport, but also industry, domestic combustion, indoor air quality, spatial planning, behaviour change, data and policy and coordination. What we've done in the options paper, which has been prepared, is to look at the different spatial levels that will be effective in delivering some of those measures. So whether that is national, regional, local, a combination of those three or a combination of two of those different spatial scales. And also at a very high level, the cost against the impact of delivering those. So those interventions have come from research that the WM Air project has done, but also from work that Public Health England has carried out as well. So in terms of what next, the paper has been prepared. There are two options, which is either to retain existing working relationships or to develop a more collaborative approach through a West Midlands air quality framework. The paper has been circulated to the Strategic Transport Officers Group, the Transport Support Group, the West Midlands Environment Protection Group, and it's also been to the Net Zero Officers and Net Zero Directors Group. So we have the paper. The Environment Bill has been, as I said, been delayed a number of times, but we're expecting that to receive royal assent in the new year. And so that's where we're at, and the decision that was made on Friday was to wait until we have that certainty and the Environment Bill to receive royal assent.
Okay, thank you. So I'll open it up for any questions or comments. Lisa?
I suppose I understand why the Met leaders would wish to defer making a decision. Presumably there's nothing to stop people reading a paper or understanding a paper. And I suppose I'm a little bit confused as to why we haven't had sight of the paper if it's already in effect in the public domain, because once you've circulated to that many officer groups, it's in the public domain. So I'm just questioning why Scrutiny hasn't received the paper.
That came from advice after the Mayor and Met leaders from the governance team at the combined authority.
So I challenge the decisions of the governance team as to why Scrutiny is not having sight of papers that officer groups are having sight of.
I think that the reasoning behind the decision, whether you agree with it or not, was that this committee was going to undertake some pre-decision scrutiny of a decision that the Combined Authority Board was going to take in November. Now that the Combined Authority Board isn't going to take that decision in November and will do it in January, February, whenever it is, then that formal pre-decision work that the committee is going to do today will be rescheduled so it aligns with the the Combined Authority Board's consideration of the paper later in the year.
I'm slightly worried to challenge a member of the governance team about their understanding of what scrutiny and pre-decision scrutiny is, but by definition, pre-decision is pre-decision. So it doesn't matter whether they have decided they're not going to take the decision for several weeks. We could have actually have had sight of that paper. We are an overview and scrutiny, so we have the ability to take a policy overview, receive the evidence, and form a view. And there is nothing to stop us, having had the paper today, and actually feeding that into the Met leaders' decision. Well aware that actually the Environment Bill might change certain things. There is an issue about fettering our ability to understand the broader policy making process, and I think I would just want it to be recorded my concern that that decision was taken.
We can reflect that, please, in the minutes. Thank you. I've got Liz first, and then I'll come to you, Ian. Liz.
Thanks very much, Kathy. And I wanted to just thank Jackie and the other colleagues who've been on that group with us, because I found the meeting's really interesting and very informative. And I suppose I'm a bit dismayed by what I've just heard, because that paper that has been shared with Vera and Peter and myself, that by reason of being on that subcommittee, it's quite a long paper, but it's got a lot of information in it. And it explains, the current powers that we have in the CA, the concurrent powers, also goes into a lot of other detail. And I think, just in terms of raising our own awareness, and our own knowledge of the policy area, it would be useful for that to circulate now, so people can actually understand, the whole policy area in greater detail. So, and again, it poses questions like why hasn't the CA collectively been able to agree to use the concurrent powers thus far? And the other thing that that I've just noticed as a local member is that I was sent an email a few weeks ago informing me about a road sensor network which is being set up by TFWM in Solihull, Birmingham and Coventry. And again, I want to know more about how that's going to be used and how the data is going to be accessible to us as local members, because in Birmingham we've got this position now that we've got clean air zone in the city centre, but constantly residents are getting in touch to ask about levels of pollution in key parts of their own local area, so by schools or in traffic junctions. So I think I'd like to know more about that sensor network and how it's going to inform any sort of policy making in the future. I mean, I don't disagree with the decision to wait until the legislation comes through, because that's just common sense. But stopping people actually informing themselves about what the current challenges are and what options are open to us, I just find bizarre. That's just an instant reaction, but that's weird.
Okay, then, so if we can just reiterate then that scrutiny requests sight of that paper, so that we can be informed going forward. And do you want to comment on, or are you able to comment on Liz's point around road sensors and surveys? Sorry, it's me.
So I'm not, but I don't know if Jane is.
Yes, I can take that back to the innovation team to find out more about what the plan is for sharing data. Yes.
Thank you.
Lisa?
I think picking up on Liz's point, and it's a broader one on how we actually secure public consent for the net zero transition. We have data being collected in various places, and it's how that data is made available to local politicians and the public, so we actually understand better what we're saying and thinking. And I know that I get challenged quite a lot. I have low traffic neighbourhoods in my ward, and I get challenged as to what has happened about pollution and scrutiny. And it could well be that the combined authority's got data on that. And I'm still wondering how we're pooling this information. Because, if we were a business, you would pull this information to make sure you understood how you actually went forward with your investment. But we always seem to, within the public authority, be unable to actually draw it all together. Or I might be doing a star.
So one of the actions in the air quality options paper is
What we haven't got to see.
Yeah, is specifically around developing a portal to open up that data around air quality. So there is quite a lot of discussion in there around data and making it accessible, and also making it, I suppose, palatable as well for people who wouldn't necessarily go in search of an air quality data portal.
Ian?
Well, for those who haven't seen it, I have, and it's an enormous amount of work, and it's very difficult to pin down over a 3.2 million population exactly what the figures are telling us. In many respects, air quality, especially in pinpoints in the conurbation, is a very topical subject and very important. But when you look at the figures of what they're trying to say in the report concerning pollution, it is allowing for mobility of people in the same time frame. It is very difficult to pin down exactly what the problems are we're getting with health. And I know that there are problems, but they're so small if I understand the report, they're so small that as I say, although it's topical and I may be a little out of fashion at the moment, but I do question when you see these figures and the size of this report, the amount of work that they are trying to qualify to come down to these figures of something like three people a day over a population of 3.2 million. It's very hard to qualify. That's my comment.
I think in terms of us talking about the report itself, I would rather defer that for another meeting because those of us that haven't seen the report can't comment on it. So Simon, you indicated that if it's specific to this report, I'd rather we kept it back just because many of us can't comment on it.
Well, I'm one of those who hasn't been allowed to see it or been given a copy of it by the working group leader. So I'm one of the underprivileged, but I think the instinctive point that I would make is that, and I've huge respect for Dan, I think he does a very good job in the governance team, and he's such a nice chap. But so I don't actually want to, in one way, to say this, but instinctively that decision was wrong because it's withheld it from scrutiny. And in one sense, I think the leaders were wrong. Because if they were choosing between go as we are or go on a more collaborative basis, I would have thought it would have been quite easy to decide that you wanted to go on a more collaborative basis, pending the decision on the actual detail of the standards you'd be applying. But surely they are in favour of working collaboratively to improve the quality of air of our citizens. So I don't think that decision held up, and I think the decision to withhold it from committee is just clearly wrong. And hopefully in future, the instinctive move will be to say to the leaders, sorry, it's been a publicly document, it's been tabled, it goes to scrutiny with a note that you didn't make a decision yet for these reasons, which we're all actually very happy with, that they're not. So that'd be my point. I think the real problem that we all know is that they probably instinctively don't want to make the information available to people. And that's the problem. But once you've announced that there are censuses, people now expect to find it out. And I don't mean the government's team when I say they don't want to make it available. We had the same thing through COVID. I had people ringing me up saying, oh, there's this site and this person is now putting out this information. The big danger is if you don't put out the real information, then this conspiracy theorists have a field day. So no, I utterly endorse what's said. Next time, let's have it properly done for us to see.
Okay, thanks for those helpful comments. I think we've already reflected those and they will be firmly reflected within the minutes. Thank you. Liz and then Peter and then, sorry Peter, and then I am going to we're going to draw this item to a close because we are massively over. Liz?
Yeah, just wanted to say quickly in response to Ian, I think you don't need to have read the detail in the paper to know that air quality is an absolute public health emergency in Birmingham. So I mean, the driving argument for the clean air zone in Birmingham is that there's 900 premature deaths a year in Birmingham that are associated with really poor air quality. And I think the pressure that we're under as local councillors in Birmingham is what we're doing to clean up the air in the rest of the city. And the most powerful evidence that I heard when I took evidence on my own scrutiny committee for Birmingham City Council to justify the clean air zone was paediatricians from the Birmingham Children's Hospital talking about the spike in air asthma and other respiratory problems amongst children in our cities. I mean, it's for the sake of the children, vulnerable older people, anybody with respiratory problems. I think, you know, if we could see if we could see air pollution in the same way that we could see, e.g., sewage, then we'd be absolutely dynamite to do something about this. So I genuinely do want to know why we haven't used the concurrent powers so far, and what we're going to do in the future, and how we're going to use any new powers that come in the parliamentary legislation to actually clean up the air in the whole city region, because it's an emergency.
So again, we'll make sure that those comments are reflected within the minutes, Liz. Peter, finally.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it kind of links in onto 12, but it's got the reporting back, and grateful for Jackie for reporting back, because it did say on 10 air quality options paper. So I actually thought that the options paper have been circulated, though it says to follow, but I thought it was actually being circulated to you. First of all, Chair, I don't understand why people have not had copies of this, because I am looking at page 28 and also 29, and it's showing you the air quality in the West Midlands option paper, and this comes from the city of Birmingham, from Solihull, Sandwell, Coventry, Walsall. So it's all coming back, Dudley, Wolverhampton. So they're all there showing their options, and I think the important thing is everybody, beg your pardon, seeing it, as you mentioned about collaboration. It'd be helpful if the non-Mets were able to see a copy of this, because they'll what they can put in as well, because we are all, as they say, we are all in this together. And I would hope it would avoid duplication. And I have to say, from the options paper that we've read, and I will also congratulate Professor Bill Bloss on the work that he has done, because I found his documents on West Midlands air and the air that we breathe, and also the COVID-19 briefing series that has been produced. I found them fascinating to read, and particularly this option paper, Chairman, when it's talked about virtual forests, but also about greater use of public transport, because we've all talked, I should imagine, at our respective councils about the importance, particularly at Birmingham, about the connectivity. And that's not just from Birmingham, this spreads across the West Midlands. But it also talks about, as Liz has mentioned, about health impacts of poor quality. But it also adds as well, Madam Chair, about rail, because we've got a lot of rail that is still diesel. We need to move that as fast as we can towards electrification, but we know that pardon the pun, is some way down the line, but hopefully it will come. But then we talked about roads, and again with the mayor, I mentioned about this urban consolidation centre, which was about HGVs being outside and being brought in on, I think it's on smaller vehicles, and again it's wanting to see HGVs moving away from diesel to less pollutant, hopefully electric. And talking of electric, there again we talked, Madam Chair, about EVs, and great to see, as we did some weeks ago, myself and Councillor Court, we saw the new hydrogen buses, which absolutely look fantastic to be going around, and there are much more of these buses to be purchased as well. Interestingly enough, when we're talking about air pollution, interestingly enough, that and it may be the same in other Mets, but when I've been going around, it's incredible the amount of roadworks that you see. And then I was stuck into some roadworks, and you're down into one lane, and I was actually looking across, at the different vehicles and seeing the plates and the numbers. And there is I think it was a 04 car sitting there, and I was watching the emissions coming out of the exhaust. And I'm just thinking, times that makes me wonder sometimes whether we could review with highways how we manoeuvre and manufacture these roadworks to try and reduce some of, especially going to work and coming back. But again, it comes back to connectivity again onto public transport. And finally, Madam Chair, is that we had a great meeting with the Birmingham City Council on the Climate Assembly at the Birmingham University, and more great things come out of that. And we've got the Environmental Board, although I noticed that it said in our last meetings that it was to be November, but we haven't had a date, and I've checked my diary, we still haven't had a date, because whilst we were at the hydrogen buses rather, and I can't remember his name, forgive me, Chairman, but the gentleman who runs the Tyseley Energy Centre, thank you, it's David, thank you, it is David Hospital, and I happened to mention to him about a visit to the centre, and he said, great, we can do that. Why don't you actually think about having the Environmental Board down at the Tyseley Centre? So I did say that's a fantastic idea, and I think somebody, Jackie, may be producing that, so I very much welcome that. And again, it is, as Lisa said, it's about action plans, and then of course the most important thing is those outcomes for us all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Peter. So again, thank you very much for your presentation, and all of our comments will be reflected within the minutes.
Okay, thank
Thank you. Okay, moving swiftly on then. Scrutiny Champion Progress Update. Simon, do you have a very brief update for us, please?
I can give you a very brief update, Chair. Simply to say that we've had one meeting of the working group chaired by the Vice Chair, and I've had a subsequent meeting with the officers concerned, focused on your request that the business plan for the affordable housing vehicle come to this committee. At the last meeting I had, which was about 10 days ago, they said that it actually hadn't fully been written, and therefore I'm waiting a draft for comment, not in any way as an alternative to coming here, but simply because that gives them a member feedback to give them some help with the presentation, so that when they come to this, they perhaps ironed out any sillies that could have been ironed out. I have been offered the opportunity to visit some of the sites that have been funded by the WMCA, and to therefore make my own opportunity to meet some of the tenants and see, who has actually benefited from the schemes, because I thought that would be useful and didn't see a reason to say no. Hopefully that's enough, bearing in mind you want to briefly.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. That's really helpful if we can have further updates at subsequent meetings. Peter, have you got anything else to add other than what you've already updated us on? Because you did quite a comprehensive
sorry, Chair, I didn't mean to go on. No,
so.
I don't think so. The only thing I actually omitted to mention, actually, and I'm grateful for that opportunity, is that I did miss out about homes with improved heating on those, and are moving away from wood and coal, obviously fossil fuels, and also about clean manufacturing as well. So that is very important. But thank you for the opportunity, and I think Liz and I enjoy the improvement on the air quality and actually clean energy as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. So moving us swiftly on then, item 13, we need to agree and approve the Transport Subcommittee minutes, because I believe the meetings were in quorum. Liz, do you want to move those minutes before anybody shoots off, so we're still just about quorum?
Yeah, happy to move those, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for those minutes?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Liz. And then we have the final item of the work programme of the Scrutiny Committee and the forward plan of the board, which is at the end of your packs. If there's any comments from anybody other than just for noting, and anything that we've discussed today where we need something to come back to us, will be fitted into the plan as appropriate. Okay, that's for noting. Our next meeting is on the, yeah, we've got the mayoral Q&A on the 15th of December, and that starts at 10 o'clock. And we had agreed, because it's the budget, the draft budget workshop, that we would have a workshop in advance of that meeting, which will take place on Thursday, the 2nd of December by Teams. So everybody will be sent a link for that. Okay, thanks ever so much, everybody, and thank you for such a good debate and everybody's positive input. Thank you. And apologies if it went over.
Councillor Trickett.